I'm going to just walk you through the setup first here in the perspective window. So I'll repeat some of the kind of early tools and shortcuts that we perhaps encountered many months ago, as it now is. So if you know this stuff already, just ignore me. But if you know, it might be handy for some people who haven't used Max in a while. Okay, so I'm just going to arc around the scene, or orbit around the scene, and I'm just doing that with the Alt and left mouse button, and it allows me to do that. Now remember, I'm in the perspective window, and if I want to look at the scene from either the top, front, or the left, I just need to hit T at the top, and I'm zooming out using the middle mouse wheel. F for front, same, zooming out using the middle mouse wheel. L for left, same again. I'm going to hit F3 just to go into wireframe mode. So F3. Now I've hit Alt and middle mouse there, and I've tried to orbit my scene, and you'll see that it's kind of lost its perspective view. If you look in the top left hand corner up here, you'll notice the word orthographic. So that's a kind of 2.5D kind of a representation of the space, if you like. And if you find yourself in that view and you're happy working in it, fine. If you want to go back to perspective, remember, just hit the P key and you'll be back in perspective. Now I'll just take you through the various elements in the scene. So on the left hand side here, you'll see that I've got 3 lights on, and they're all named Arnold Light 01, top, left and right. So top, left and right. And they're the only, he says, they're the only things in the scene that I haven't frozen. So we're going to be accessing those, and there's a reason for that, because you know, freezing things it's very useful. I mean, it means that you can't accidentally go in there and click things and move things around if you're happy with the position of various elements. So I've frozen everything else because we don't really need to deal with anything at the moment. Let's have a little look at the scene with a different lighting mode. So where it says standard here, I'm just going to click on that. I'm going to go to active shade using Arnold. And what I get to see here is the scene, and currently the scene is being lit by one light only. So I'm going to just deal with that one light first. So I'll just turn active shade off, and I'm going to deal with that light. And what we're going to do is to just kind of get into position that I like. I'm just going to use the Alt and right click just to recenter the scene. Okay. If I want to view the scene from the camera view, I just hit C on the keyboard, and it takes me into the camera view. Now I've frozen the camera, so we can't mess it. You know, we can't move its position or accidentally kind of throw it out of position. So that's kind of handy. So we can go from P to perspective, C to camera anytime we want to render, and remember F9 is our render button. That's our quick render. We have the F10 option to go into the scene render, which gives us a lot more options. But I've got this set up so that it's ready to render nice and fast, using a HDTV kind of format, 16:9 format. Anyway, come to that another time. So back to my perspective window, and what I'll do is I'll go up to Tools, and I'm going to use the Light Lister. It's a very handy tool. It shows me what lights are being used in the scene, and I can turn them on and off. It's like a global lighting switch here. So at the moment there's only one light in the scene on. Let me just put the active shade back on for a moment. I'm going to just work with this light for a second. So if I just click this little button down here, this one here, it activates the parameters on the right hand side for this right hand light. Okay, so let's just examine this light before we deal with the other lights. Okay, so what we've got here is an Arnold light. Okay, it's currently on with a target distance of 1.72 meters, so that's its current target distance there. You can see the green line extending out as I change that target distance. Okay, it's what we call a quad light, and the quad refers to this shape here. Now currently that quad can be changed like this. Okay, so I can change it in that direction and in that direction. You can see as I'm changing it, its influence in the scene is also changing. We've also, now I want to control this first of all, so this is the first thing we want to do, is be able to control the shape and the effect of this one light. Okay, so I'm just going to position it or change its size like so. I'm going to come over here and you'll be able to see as I drop this down, I'm just going to turn this button here, sorry, this spinner here, I'm just going to zero it out. And what that means is that the light it won't spread, it'll just kind of give a parallel light onto any surface, okay? And as I change its dimensions, you'll see the effect there. Okay, so currently that light is just influencing that little bit of space there. It's almost like a projector in a sense. If I change the spread, you can see it's starting to spread the influence of the light out. So I'm just going to put this quad to 1 meter by 1 meter. I'll leave the spread at 0.5. And that pretty much illuminates this white plane over here. And this white plane is going to be very useful because it's going to bounce light back into the scene as well, just like we have one over here as well. So this is very typical in the studio. What you have in a studio is something called, you have these things kind of called light or soft boxes. And soft boxes can be all sorts of shapes and sizes, but they have a light inside them and they're generally white. You also have things in studios called reflectors, which bounce the light back onto the subject. So these are kind of simulating something of that, like the softbox or the reflector. Okay, so we've got its target, we've got its spread, and we've got the size of the light, and we've even got the roundness. Now the roundness won't be apparent straight off, but if I take the spread off again, and then I change the roundness, you will get to see it. There we go. But it's hard to see when the spread's on because obviously the spread means that the light extends beyond the bounds of that plane over here on the left hand side. So for the time being I'll leave roundness at 0 and I'll leave the spread as it is. I think it was at 0.5. Okay, so let's just turn active shade off. Let's do a quick render, F9. And noticed, there we go. So there's my one light source influencing these two little spheres down here. These spheres have kind of chrome type material on them. The background here has a kind of neutral grey on it. Often used in the studio, black, white, grey are often used as kind of like grounds for a model or an object to sit on top of. Okay, so we've got one light in the scene. I've done not very much to it at all, just changed it a little bit. So let's get those properties back up by clicking that little button there again. I'll draw your attention to the fact that the colour currently is using something called a Kelvin temperature, and we could just set the colour to white if we liked. Just have a little look at the effect there. My thing's responding. Okay, so I've set it to white and all that kind of bluishness has gone. Kelvin colours are used in photography a lot to describe the colour of light. So at 1200 you've got a pretty warm 12,000. Sorry, you've got a pretty cool blue tone to your light. So you can experiment with the color. You can experiment with what we call the temperature, and then you've got some presets in here which relate to kind of fluorescent lights. Okay, now go a little bit further down. We've got intensity and exposure. I'll look at the active shade, and I'll leave the intensity at 1, but I'll take the exposure down. So we kind of got 2 settings. Let's turn the active shade off. I'm turning the active shade off before I hit F9 because I noticed before my machine wasn't playing ball and it was kind of freezing, or it was refusing to render. Okay, so the exposure was pretty low there. Let's go back to my active shade. It gives me a nice reading. So once again, click on the light, and I'm going to put my exposure back up to, I think it was at 9. So 9 was a nice setting. Okay, there are more things to consider, but we'll not go too deep into this at this point. This is enough to get you up and running. There are, of course, shadows turned on over here, and we want to leave those on. We'll come to the things like sampling at another point. But just in this session, let's control one light first, and then when we've done that, we can start to introduce the other lights into the scene. And then we can have a little, I'll just go into my active shade off again, and I'll just go to my camera view. Well, I'll just hit F9 to begin with. Give you a kind of view. Oh, it's doing my camera view anyway. There we go. So that would be my camera view with the 3 lights on. So we've got a light at the top, which is the most intense light. Then we've got a left and a right. The one on the right's got a kind of blue Kelvin color. The one on the left is a warmer color, warmer Kelvin setting. Okay, let's come back into perspective, and I'm just going to cancel that, and I'm going to make sure that I'm rendering from the perspective here. And there we go. That's not quite it either, so I'll just cancel that. Hit the render button again, try and get that. Oh, that's the top window that I'm accidentally rendering. So select the floating perspective there. And let's see if I can get that to render. There we go. Okay, so I'll just come out there for a sec. Let's take a slightly more head-on view of this render. Not getting that. Just going to hit F10. I'm not getting the render I want, and F10 should let me do a straight-on render. Okay, so when all 3 lights are on, this is the kind of impression you're going to get. So the panel on the left is receiving the blue light. That's got that nice blue soft tinge. We've got a overhead light casting light straight down onto the ground, and a panel, and the light on the left is casting a warmer yellow light onto the other panel. That gives us a kind of warmth. Light tends to have color. I mean, we always think of it as white, but it's not white. It's because it's picking up color from objects, often, the sky, the environment around us. So we're going to play with the kind of notion of light and color and working together there. So what I would recommend is I would turn those off. I'd work with one light at a time. Just go through the settings, make sure you understand how to control one light, then introduce a second light. When you've got that one working the way you want it to work, introduce the third light. That will do. That will get us going, get us some interesting renders. As I say, everything else is frozen. I'll just really quickly before I sign off, that's 15 minutes, that's long enough. I'll just show you we've actually only got 4 materials. We've actually got 3 materials being used in the scene. There is a 4th one, and I'll just reference it really quick and then I'll turn it off again. I'll show you what that fourth one's doing real fast. Underneath the rendering menu, if you go to environment, it's preloaded into the environment map, but it's currently not on. But I can turn it on. And basically, it's like a skybox. And as such, it will influence, if I go to my camera settings, it will influence the color reflections in the scene. And I want to get my... It's been a little bit ropey about picking out the right camera view, but there we go. So with that additional skybox in the scene, we're getting more... Basically, that skybox is emitting light. It's not just acting as a way of reflecting things. It needs a bit of work because we're getting all this noise here on the chrome now, and that's coming off the sky map. So come back to that, and we'll do some work on refining that sky map's emissive qualities at another time. But anyway, it's in there for reference. Okay, so this is kind of a good place to start. I hope it works for you. I'll just turn that on before I sign off. There we go, turn that off. There's our little scene. Okay, that's doing something quite weird. I'm getting a kind of overwrite. Okay, over and out. That should do it. Let's see what happens. Okay.